This town hall meeting. My name is Kate Schmidt. I'm an elementary school teacher in my 30th year of the education profession. Thank you. I taught right up the road at Glacier Hills for 20 years here in Eagan. I'm currently on leave from my teaching position, serving as the president of Dakota County United Educators. And DQ is the local union that represents over 2,100 teachers in District 196. We're very excited for tonight's event. As we begin, if you could please rise and remove your hats, as Cache from Eagan High School is going to lead us in the national anthem. The choir is directed by their teacher, Jim Cox. So we are going to say the pledge in a couple minutes, but you might want to sit down first. Before I hand it over to Representative Craig, I'd like to lay out the ground rules for the event this evening. In order to keep the town hall respectful and make sure that we have time to take as many questions as possible, we will be keeping to the following ground rules. This town hall has Minnesota rules, which means that we all treat one another with respect. Tough questions are great and welcomed. Obscenity is not allowed and will keep each person from enjoying the town hall. Each person will have 1 minute to ask one question. Everyone gets to ask one question before anyone gets to ask a second question. If you would like to ask another question, you are more than welcome to go to the end of the line and wait for your chance to come up again. If you have not asked a question by the time 1 minute rolls around, I will prompt you to ask your question at that time. Remember, I'm an elementary school teacher. I will be firm, but kind. Angie's responses to each question will be limited to 2 minutes so that we can get as many questions as possible. And nothing gives me more pleasure than having to cut off a representative of the United States.
She enjoys it.
So with that, I'm going to hand it off with Representative Craig to make her opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to start this evening by asking if you have served this nation. This is really important to me. My own grandfather served in World War II in the Navy, and in my family, 2 of my uncles served in Vietnam. One of them, sadly, is no longer with us. He died of cancer after what we believe was Agent Orange exposure during that tour. So if you serve this nation, and if you're able, could you please rise so that we could recognize you and stay up? Thank you so much. And I'd like to ask the audience, if you're able to, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag Thank you so very much. If you're a local elected official, a member of a school board, a city council, if you are the mayor of Eagan, who may or may not be in the crowd tonight, please stand. Mike, it's good to see you. Thank you. I really wanted to recognize Mike McGuire, and I couldn't find him, so that was one way. So, Mike, it's good to see you, and thank you so much for what you do for the city of Eagan. This is my hometown, Eagan. So we are the first time we've been in Eagan since we started our series of town halls every single month. This is our 10th town hall since I was sworn in. 10th town hall as a member of Congress, and I always like to start just so that you can get a sense of who they are. That way after, if you have an issue you want to come talk to them about, you'll know. Wanted to start with my district outreach team. Nick Coe, if you could rise and kind of wave your hand. Nick's over in the corner. Nate Fowler is one of my community liaisons. Morris Allen is another one of my community liaisons. Mike Siebenaller. Mike is in the back there. He is part of my casework team. Christina Diaz is here in the back as well. She is part of my casework team as well. And I also want to recognize Kaylee Gumbiner, who is sitting right here. And they have the bell. So, Kaylee, can I have you ding it once? That is going to tell you that your 1 minute is up. And my staff loves to ding me, so they are going to ding me as well. And if that doesn't work, then Kate will stop me too. So there you go. Our caseworkers are here to help you navigate and solve issues that you may have with the federal government. So things like Social Security, disability, Veterans Administration issues that you may have. So remember that this team is here as an outreach to each of you. In fact, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that just happened in the last few weeks. One, we helped a young woman with the U of M School of Agriculture obtain a visa to study in Italy. She was set to do an internship there and couldn't quite get in touch with the officials she needed to, and so we were able to help her, and she was able to go on her internship. We also helped sort out a power of attorney issue with a woman who was in a nursing home facility. She wanted to be able to use her tax return to pay for expenses at that facility. So I mentioned these couple of things just so you'll know the kinds of activities. It really does vary that this casework team works on. So thank you, Kate, for being here so much. My opening remarks really are that so far as your representative, I have authored 13 bills myself, and thank you. And I've co-sponsored 261 bills, 79% of which are bipartisan. And we always talk about this at our town halls. I know it doesn't get the attention that we're actually working on a bipartisan basis in Washington. That's why I love being in the home district, because when I'm talking to each of you, I'm not listening to cable news. In fact, I'm on a cable news diet right now because I think the best thing we can do is listen to each other and figure out where is that 80% that we can work together on in this nation. And I'm really excited to have that kind of bipartisan record. I wanted to highlight just a few priority areas of legislation with you tonight, and then we'll turn it directly to Q&A in the audience. But many of you heard recently that we introduced something called H.R. 3. And the most important part of this is that it would end the congressionally legislative ban on Medicare negotiating for prescription drug prices. It would also cap the out-of-pocket expenses for Medicare recipients, Medicare patients, at $2,000 per year on prescription drugs. And it uses the cost savings associated from this in a number of different ways. So one thing I would like to say is that the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan CBO, scored this bill this week at a $345 billion savings to federal taxpayers if we pass this legislation. And that's going to allow us to reinvest in NIH funding to go after the treatment of disease in this nation. It's going to allow us, should we pass this law, the ability to pass H.R. 1425, which is my bill that would stabilize the price of health care in the individual marketplace, which is a serious issue for those who don't have employer-sponsored health care in this country right now. So keep an eye on H.R. 3. That has not gone through committee yet. I look forward to working across the aisle and with committee members on that piece of legislation. The other thing that I want to mention is just the work that I've been doing over these past 10 months on behalf of family farmers in this community. You know, when I started running for Congress, I remember years ago I told Chairman Colin Peterson that Ag Committee Chair Colin Peterson, if I ever made it to Congress, that I wanted to serve on the Ag Committee. And a few months ago, I woke up to my morning news clips, and he had given an interview, and most of you know how grouchy Colin can be. He had given an interview to an Ag newsletter, and they said, who are some of the best new members of the Ag Committee? And Colin started with, well, I didn't know what to think about her 2 years ago, but... And then he went on to say something nice about me. So that is considered a compliment coming from Congressman Colin Peterson, I'll tell you. But it has just been an honor to work with our family farmers throughout this congressional district. This has been an incredibly stressful time with the trade war that we've been in the middle of. This has been an incredibly stressful time because prices continue to really be low. And all the people who talk to me want is a fair price, and they want open markets. And so I've tried to work and have worked with the administration on things like the Feed Act, which was my bill with Congressman Dusty Johnson, a Republican from South Dakota, that would allow cover crops, prevent plant of cover crops and haying and grazing before that November 1st deadline. And we actually got that done. The administration called me and said, we're gonna go ahead and adopt that under the authority of the secretary. And so I've been working hard to make sure that we open up these new markets, like with Japan. I've encouraged the administration to go back to the EU and open up more markets for our nation's farmers. And I'll continue to work with the administration on any issue that I believe is going to help stabilize and save family farms in this country. I can't tell you how important it is to save our family farms. 95% of this district is family farms. We're talking about second and third and fourth generation farmers. This is not just about losing a business. This is about losing your great-grandfather's business if you don't make it through these tough times. My grandfather didn't make it through the tough times in the 1980s farm crisis. I spent over 2 years working in international businesses, and that is why this issue is so incredibly important to me. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I passed a bipartisan bill out of the House Committee on Small Business. It was a mentorship program for small business owners it came out of committee with 100% of the vote. Every Republican, every Democrat on the committee voted for it. And we also, last week, had Chairman Peter DeFazio, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, here in Minnesota. I was honored that he came to see firsthand the infrastructure investments that are needed in Minnesota and around the 2nd Congressional District. We went over to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, where specifically, because I'm on the Aviation Subcommittee, we looked at the need for an incident command center at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, and we talked about how we can continue to invest in our airport infrastructure and in the economy. Now recently, there's been a little noise in Eagan over the topic of airplane noise. And so many of you may know also that I've been encouraging the Airports Commission to take a strong look at the City of Eagan's recommendations to make sure that every community is treated fairly with respect to the amount of noise, overhead noise, that its citizens must endure. So it's a balance. We all know that we live in Eagan. We have good access to the airport. I'll go back to Washington tomorrow. I feel a little bit guilty about how short my commute is compared to some other members in the rest of the country, but I think we have to be cognizant of the burden of noise in each of our communities. So these past 2 weeks in the district, the last 14 days, I've spent a lot of time out and about talking to folks. Thank you to so many who've come to some of those events. We had a town hall-like Q&A with the Dakota County Chamber with local businesses right here in Eagan. I've been to a couple of festivals in South St. Paul and in Cannon Falls. I've toured the Lock and Dam, #2, over in Hastings, just looking at the Mississippi River, the Minnesota River, all of these beautiful river communities, but also the great need of dredging those rivers so that we can keep commerce working up and down them. I held a vaping prevention roundtable out in Shakopee here a few days ago. And I welcomed the Vice President to the 2nd Congressional District. I asked that the Vice President take the time to meet with the small business owners and the family farmers who have been affected by this trade war, those corn growers who've been affected by the small refinery oil waivers, and to take care and a look at just what these trade wars are costing our economy. So I've said to many of you who've been to my town halls before, I view my job as to stand with the administration when I think it's good for us, to stand against them when I think it's going to hurt us, and to do the same thing to Democrats when I think it's good for us. I support it. When I think it's going to hurt the people of this district or maybe isn't exactly the right way to go, then I'll stand against it. So I really appreciate so many of you. Now more than ever in this country, and I've said this many times, I believe that we need leaders who show up, who listen, who are civil to one another and to all of you, whether we always agree on everything. I have 4 kids, 4 boys. I know in my own family we can't even agree on everything. But if I can listen to you a little more deeply, and if we can find 80% that we can agree on from a policy perspective in this country, I think it's a pretty good rate. So tonight, I just say to you that I'm a member of Congress who is going to keep showing up, who's going to keep listening to everyone, and who's going to keep working for a less divided country, who's going to keep working to make sure that we listen to and we hear each other again. So thank you. And before we get going with Q&A, I just want to recognize Senator Jim Carlson, who is over in the corner there standing. Jim is the state senator from this part of my congressional district. Jim, thank you for being here tonight.
TV wants me to use the mic. So the microphone is right here. If you have a question for Representative Craig, you can come get in line.
Hi, I'm Karen from Eagan, and I appreciate, my main question was going to be about protecting Medicare, so I'm glad to hear that you're already working on how do we reduce costs. But a couple months ago, you did a roundtable on Alzheimer's and the research that was going on with that, and having lost my mom to Alzheimer's, I'm especially worried for families about cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, because I know that with the aging population and Alzheimer's becoming more and more rampant, I'm wondering how we protect the system in general, and specifically how do we support families that are supporting people with Alzheimer's.
Karen, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's really important personal issue to me. My grandfather, who farmed, also suffered from dementia late in his life before he died. And, you know, this $345 billion, just by making Big Pharma compete, just by making Big Pharma charge the United States government a fair price compared to what they charge the rest of the world, to me that doesn't seem like asking so much to big brand name pharma who have been overcharging Americans for years. And you will see me continue to support NIH funding for additional research into Alzheimer's. You're also going to see me advocate for strengthening the Medicare program that exists today, in addition to Medicaid, with some of those cost savings. So that's the question. If we're going to save money in our healthcare system, can we use those dollars saved to expand access in our healthcare system? So we're talking about expanding Medicare to include vision and dental. We're talking about reinvesting in the Affordable Care Act to stabilize the healthcare system in the individual marketplace so people can actually afford the insurance in the individual marketplace, as two of those steps, in addition to just making sure that you know, the people who need health care can get it in this country. I am a huge advocate for universal access to health care, and the question isn't should every American have access to health care, the question is how do we get there? So thank you.
You were talking earlier about farming and the trade problems. When do you think that the USMCA is going to come up for a vote, and do you plan on supporting it?
Thank you so much for being here. And yes, I have been in multiple conversations on USMCA, on the trade war with China. And I'm going to tell you, I worked in two businesses that absolutely depended on international sales and revenue to have the 18,000 employees that we had in the United States. So I tend to start from a point of yes on trade agreements. We are in the middle of negotiating, and I will tell you that it's actually going really well. When the Vice President was here, he talked about USMCA and that getting to the House floor by the fall. The administration is negotiating with a working group of Democrats right now, and there are two issues that have to be sorted before that gets to the floor, and I'm optimistic that they will be. The first issue is we've lost a ton of manufacturing jobs to Mexico under NAFTA. And the reason that's happened is they always say they're gonna raise their labor standards and pay better wages in Mexico, but there hasn't been an enforcement mechanism in our trade agreements to get them to actually do that. So the negotiating point right now between Democrats and the administration is around just making sure that the enforcement mechanisms are there. The other issue is brand name pharma. In USMCA, even though it wasn't even in the original NAFTA, got itself into USMCA, and it's raising the market exclusivity period for pharma drugs. In other words, brand name drug companies get to be on the market longer with no competition in Canada and in Mexico. And the thing that I want to make sure of is that that doesn't cause prescription drug prices to go up in the United States. So I feel really optimistic. U.S. Trade Ambassador Robert Lighthizer is the person negotiating this agreement. He has been tremendous. He works for the administration. And I expect to be able to get to yes on USMCA to answer your question.
I'm a teacher, so I like to give feedback. Great job on those first two questions. Under a minute, you get a B+, because she had to ring the bell.
This is a tough crowd with you here, Kate. Tough crowd.
Hi, I believe you actually sponsored the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women, and up until now this has been bipartisan for years. Suddenly it seems to have hit a snag. My question is, what do you think the chances are of it being introduced in the Senate, and if it is, of it passing in the Senate?
Well, thank you for being here, and it is really extraordinary that we have over 200 pieces of legislation right now sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, awaiting a vote. And the Violence Against Women Act is one of those. I offered an amendment in this particular bill when it passed. My amendment got bipartisan support. It was pretty simple. We're asking the Department of Education and Betsy DeVos to look at best practices around our colleges and universities and report back to the Congress on what programs are working best to diminish, eliminate, stop, reduce violence against women on college campuses. So, Nika, I can't give you an answer because it's literally sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk or in a drawer somewhere. And to be fair, if the Senate wants to vote down the Violence Against Women Act, if that's what we want to do, give it a vote. Let's just let the American people know where you stand on these issues. Did I do better that time? Good.
Hi, I'm Mindy. And I just think that a healthy middle class is vital to a good economy. And I think that healthy unions, are vital to a healthy middle class. And I'm just wondering if there's been any movement on that. I know you've been involved with some bills to protect public employees so that they can.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Wow, we're like 4 for 4 on under a minute. So thank you for the question. Look, I do believe in the right to organize and collectively bargain in this country. And that belief is born from my own grandmother, who was a union manufacturing worker and got up every single day and dipped glue in heels in a shoe factory to help my mom raise her 3 kids. My grandmother moved 4 doors down after my dad left to make sure that she was close to us and could help out. And, we know if we look at a chart of when wage growth stopped moving in this country, it's truly tied to the decimation of organized labor in this country. And so that's why I am a proud supporter of something called the PRO Act. The PRO Act would make sure that these right to work for less laws that these states have been passing are eliminated. And at the federal level, we would establish a law that would allow everyone to organize and collectively bargain if you choose to do so. So that's one of the challenges we have in the state of Minnesota, is if a manufacturing plant can move somewhere else that has right to work laws and they can pay their folks less, then you see that level of movement in some of our manufacturing facilities. So look, at the end of the day, I think it's a part of a strong, growing middle class. I also think that we need real middle-class tax reform in this country. Real middle-class tax reform, not the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which focused all the giveaways to the top 5% and to large corporations. And at the end of the day, I'm sure you all saw that billionaires paid a lower effective tax rate than the bottom American taxpayers for the first time. And that was just announced in the last week. And that's just wrong. It just is wrong. B++.
Thanks. The American university and college system gives us a big competitive advantage in the global marketplace because we attract the best and brightest from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. But unfortunately, most of those folks have to quickly go home afterwards due to immigration constraints. There's lots of noise about the southern border and Central American immigration. It seems like there's partisan deadlock there, but with your 79% bipartisan efforts, is there anything going on that could help us keep some of that rich talent here without having to resolve the more contentious border issue before that happens?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is extraordinary when you look at the number of Minnesota's Fortune 500 companies that were either started by immigrants or children of immigrants that have grown to be these massive employers in the state of Minnesota. You know, the truth is, unfortunately, a lot of these, what seem like very common sense issues, have gotten caught up in the politics of immigration. You know, I believe fully that if we're going to bring someone here and let them go to school here, if they want to stay, for goodness sake, and start a business and give Americans jobs, that we ought to find a way in our immigration system to do that. It is really hard for me to believe that it was only about 6 years ago now that on a bipartisan basis, 67 senators put forth a comprehensive immigration reform bill in this nation. And if you talk to you know, the Minneapolis Fed chairman, he will tell you that, you know, one of the greatest drivers of economic growth to this nation is actually comprehensive immigration reform. That means we fund our border security and protection, but protecting it for the 21st century with drones, with sonar, with radar. It means we give a blue card to our farm community where they can have year-round ag workers. That's another big immigration issue that has gotten caught up into the politics of immigration. I support comprehensive immigration reform. I think we can both protect our borders and be the kind of country that is welcoming to immigrants in this nation.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm Dan. I'm from Eagan, lifelong resident here. I work at a bank. Sorry for the fees. I'm just a teller, but in that role, one of the things that I see all the time are people that write all sorts of things on, you know, currency, whether it be all things like Trump 2020 or I want Bernie Sanders to live here with an arrow pointed to the U.S. Treasury. But recently, last week, I got a bill in that said, on the front of it where it says United States of America, they crossed out America and wrote Trump. And then on the back where it said, "In God we trust," they crossed out God and wrote Trump. Now, however you feel about the president, however you feel about, you know, whatever political issue it is of our time, that has to offend our various sensibilities as Americans. Only North Korea elevates its dead president to that level of being a literal god. And so I wanted to thank you for your stance on impeachment because, frankly, I think it reinforces the idea of having a statement about the rule of law and that it matters in this country, and as a young person, it has a stake in the future. My question was, how do we reinforce a culture of the rule of law, both at our level and where you are?
Thank you. Look, I think it's even simpler than that. How do we reinforce civility in our country? How do we listen to each other and perhaps disagree, but disagree respectfully? And at the end of the day, you know, I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a party, not to a president. That's what being in a representative democracy is all about. And I believe that our representative democracy is critical to who we are as a nation, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today and having a town hall. We really appreciate it. Also, thank you for your support of medical innovation. As you know, this is Medical Alley, and as a part of that, we have 1,000 different employers in the medical space, including everything from Mayo Clinic up to Medtronic, where I work, and that's 500,000 employees. So I also want to thank you for co-sponsoring the legislation to repeal the Medical Device Act. As you know, it's set to expire at the end of this year. If that goes into effect January 1st, then it will be, doing what it did last time, and that's impacting employees. Last time it was in effect, it impacted 30,000 employees, and of course none of us want that. Also impacts innovation and such. And so my question is, as we go to the end of this year, are you committed to going to leadership and asking them to make this a priority, to get that in place so that we can continue to protect the jobs and innovation that it supports?
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, and thank you for working in the medical device, medtech industry. I've seen an awful lot of the good work and life-saving treatments that have been developed over the years. The answer is yes. Dean Phillips and I, along with Congressman Tom Emmer, just penned a letter to leadership, our various leaderships, asking them to prioritize this. And I think I might be the only Democrat who ever had an ad run against her for wanting to eliminate a tax. But I do think that, you know, the number of jobs that are supported in our community, and, you know, I've said from the start, does this excise tax, remember, this is a tax on revenue. You know, this is a tax on revenue. So who this tax hurts most are small startup companies who don't yet have a profit. It's the structure of the tax from the start. But on the same hand, I've always said, look, I want to make sure that we are supporting the access to health care, the millions of Americans who over the last 9 years have gained access to health care, and how can we continue to support to get to universal health care in this country. So thank you so much.
Angie, Kate mentioned a B+. I got to tell you, your A+ far exceeds in my book. Thank you so much for your service. It's just, we're incredibly proud of what you're doing. My question is really about Medicare for All. In my profession, probably an average of 5 times a week, people say to me, I'd retire today if I could afford the cost of health care. Everyone in their 60s is waiting to get on Medicare so that they can retire. So given that we're spending twice the money and getting not as good outcomes as other countries, can't we redirect those dollars and go to a Medicare for All system eventually?
Well, thank you for being here. And look, I think we ought to set up a choice. We ought to take our current Medicare system. We ought to make sure it has all of the essential health benefits that are required under current law. And we ought to start with allowing consumers to buy into their choice, if they want to, buy into Medicare. So let's go out and prove the marketplace, right? So if that's what we think. So I've signed on to a bill that would establish a public option, as I've described. And, you know, the truth is, and I've said this many times, Medicare itself is a fee-for-service pay system. And I ended up, as part of my 25 years in business, having responsibility for health policy and reimbursement under my set of responsibilities, specifically with Medicare. And I have seen what happens in a fee-for-service pay system that really rewards volume instead of volume and treatment of disease, instead of rewarding keeping people healthy and well. And so, you know, I actually think that we could get to universal health care faster if we look at an Australian model. So Australia has a DRG system that employers provide their employer health care insurance, not for profit, by the way, through. And there's also a basic level of health care offered to every single American. You know, we're already paying for health care for every American. It's just called the emergency room, and it bankrupts people. So can't we find a better way to get to universal health care faster? I think that's the case. Thank you.
My name is Lynn, and Representative Craig, we hear a lot about the bills that have passed out of the House, or that this is a do-nothing Congress. Could you tell us how many or what percentage of bills have passed from the House and are sitting on Senator McConnell's desk, and how many bills have passed from the Senate and are sitting on Speaker Pelosi's desk?
Wow, that is a great question. My data is probably a couple of weeks old from when I left DC, but the numbers were something like 240 bills have passed the United States House of Representatives in the first 10 months of the year. Bills like protecting pre-existing conditions, bills like H.R. 1, sweeping campaign finance reform, the Equality Act, the American Dream and Promise Act, bipartisan background checks, Climate Action Now, raising the minimum wage. All of these things are sitting on the Senate's desk right now. I can tell you there have been about 5 or 6 bills actually signed into law in this session. Only 5 or 6 bills. One of them, I'm very happy to say, was the Autism Cares Act, which I believe was signed into law by the President last week. Many of these pieces of legislation that I've just said, I think they'd have a good chance of passing the Senate if Mitch McConnell would force the Senate to actually take a vote. Because you can't tell me in this country that you can raise a family on $7.25 an hour. It's just not possible. So we're working hard. My responsibility is to work with all of you to offer legislation. We need a partner in the Senate that will also take up the nation's needs and legislation as well.
Good evening. I imagine you've heard the recent news about the Turkish military targeting Syrian Kurds, who we used to support. What do you think should be done here, and what will you do in Congress to help get it done?
I have to tell you that this is probably the worst foreign policy decision that I've seen from this administration. We have weakened our international alliances by abandoning the Kurds. We have handed over the region to Turkey and to the Russians and to Syria. And at the end of the day, we have made America weaker because the counterterrorism efforts that were working in that region have been undone in a matter of 72 hours. 72 hours. What do I believe we can do? I believe we will come back to Washington tomorrow. I believe there will be a very strong bipartisan effort in the House and the Senate to impose sanctions on Turkey, to make it clear that what is happening right now is not okay. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you, the damage has been done. The die is cast here, and this is just a great example of why you need experienced diplomatic and military leaders in the room. I've always said, you know, the last time we threatened to pull out all of our troops from Syria, remember, we only have a small strategic troop force there now anyway. The last time we started to do that, 4 Americans were killed by ISIS. 4 Americans. And so as long as ISIS is a threat, and I believe they are even more of a threat today than they were, I believed we should have had continued our promise with the Kurds and kept a very strategic force in Syria. And it makes no sense, the troops that we're sending to Saudi Arabia.
Hi, my name is Anita. I'm from Farmington. I just wanted to bring up, it's been the practice in this country to protect people from faulty or defective products by suing manufacturers, forcing them to either improve their product or remove it from public circulation. For example, we've just seen with Zantac what happened is it flew off store shelves after cancer-causing chemicals were discovered in it because of all the fear of lawsuits. However, the pharmaceutical industry has a golden calf, a holy grail, if you will, that is seemingly untouchable. They were sued countless times for their defective product, but rather than correct or improve it, they cried out to our government to take the burden off of them. As of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, pharmaceutical companies no longer face liability when their product is defective, causing harm or death. Instead, lawsuits are covered by a tax added to the cost every time we use this product. Would you support returning liability to the manufacturers so that they will have the incentive to create a better product instead of just adding more and more bad products to the recommended schedule? And if you'll allow, I have a list comparing the CDC schedule of vaccines from 1980 compared to 2017 and what has happened there. If I could share that with you.
Was it Anita?
Yes.
Yes, Anita, thank you for being here today. The answer is yes, I want to protect consumers over manufacturers and certainly on defects. If there is a particular piece of legislation that you're recommending we look at, Kaylee will give that to me and we'll take a look at it, and I really appreciate you coming here. I don't know if a number of you have been here at previous town halls when you've sent me away to look at a piece of legislation. There are literally thousands that have been introduced in the Congress so far this session, so I'll commit to taking a look at that, Anita. Thank you.
Question pertaining to Medicare, because I've been on it for almost 10 years. It's a twofold question. One is, why when we get the benefit book, can they not put in the information necessary so that we know what we're dealing with as far as deductibles go? Because it always just says deductible because Congress never votes on what the deductible is going to be till after it's put into effect. Number two, when I listen to everybody saying Medicare for everybody, Medicare's not that good. I go 2 to 3 years in between going in for a wellness exam because they fail to cover it, and for 2 years I fight in order to get the benefit. I'm going to end it at that.
Well, I don't know that I disagree with anything you just said. I do think, you know, it's worth looking at, you know, what are the Center for CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, doing versus the Congress. But I can tell you, as we look at the components of H.R. 3, one of my highest priorities is to cap your out-of-pocket.
Medicare and Medicaid are not the same thing.
Yep.
Be aware of that.
Thank you. Hospitals tell me that all the time on the reimbursement rates, too.
Support impeachment, but I think we need to go a bit further because the Ukraine issue is only one of the many, many crimes this administration has been involved in. I could go on and on about it, but I only have a minute. So I want to focus on the children at the border who are being held in conditions that are worse than prisons, being denied basic constitutional rights, the right to fair trial. They have no charges against them, but they can't see a lawyer. No one has access to see them. This isn't just a policy difference. This is serious violations of the law and human rights. And I want to know what can be done to hold this administration accountable for the violation of basic human rights.
Well, the first thing that I want to share with you is I'm actually headed after votes on Friday to the border to tour many of the detention centers personally and myself to see firsthand the conditions. So thank you for that. The U.S. House has actually already started drafting legislation to hold anyone accountable for making sure that there is a basic level of care for people who are being detained at those borders, just making sure that we're keeping people safe. and that there's accountability for it. I also want to say, after you go look up the various pieces of legislation, that it is highly unlikely that the Senate will pass those pieces of legislation. So we're working hard to make sure that the administration knows what we consider to be humane treatment of folks who lawfully enter our country seeking asylum, and we'll continue to work with them.
Hi, Angie. I wanted to say that I too support your stance on impeachment. I think it's important that the president be held accountable for his actions. Not only the president, but the Congress. Regardless of whether he's removed from office or not, I think it's important that each congressperson step forward and either say what you did was wrong or what you did was not wrong. My concern at this point goes beyond the current situation in that the president seems to be rewriting the rules of checks and balances by putting people like Pompeo and Barr in place who seem to have sworn a loyalty to him and are willing to cover his back over the desires of the American people. My question is, what, if anything, is Congress doing right now to strengthen the checks and balances over the executive office?
Well, thank you. Well, supporting an impeachment inquiry is not something that I take lightly, nor is it something that I ever wanted to have to support. But at the end of the day, we have to ensure that every elected official is held to account in this country. This is a sad, somber time for this country. And I can tell you this, that if I close my eyes and I say, if this were a Democratic president who asked a foreign power to interfere in a United States election, would I have the courage to stand up and say, we have to get to the bottom of this, we have to follow the facts? And this isn't about party, it's not about partisanship, this is about abuse of power, it's about right and wrong, and at the end of the day, we have to get to the bottom of the facts here, so thank you.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I'm the father of 4 kids. Love them, ages 8 to 1. One thing I've been noticing happen in the country, specifically California, is the removal of the freedom of parents to make healthcare decisions for their children. So I'm wondering what is being done in Congress to ensure that parents can still maintain that freedom over healthcare decisions.
So I'm not as familiar with what you're referring to in California.
Specifically like vaccinations along those lines, but also the broader spectrum as well.
Well, at the federal level, obviously I support on vaccinations the responsibility of the Centers for Disease Control in making the recommendations for what is best health care policy in this country. And I will continue to support our experts and our scientists to recommend to the nation, and I will likely continue to support federal policy that relies on that science and those recommendations. So I appreciate your question and your passion for the topic, but we have to follow the guidelines for the CDC, or these diseases that we thought were gone are going to come back. So thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna interrupt you before you go. Sure. It is 8 p.m. and we want to be conscious of everyone's time. So there's only time for 2 more questions. Those of you who will not be able to get your question answered in line tonight, be sure to find one of Angie's staff members who have communication cards that are being handed out, or you can speak with one of her staff out of the after the town hall meeting has ended.
Heck, I'll stay 5 minutes and the three of you can tell me what you were going to tell me. How about that? Awesome.
I really don't have a question. I just have some thoughts from my perspective, what I'd like to share with you. One of them is I believe in the sanctity of life as far as the unborn are concerned. I believe in religious freedom for all those who believe in the Lord. I believe that I don't support a union. My husband was a union and he no longer had a job after Northwest strike. I also think that we need to focus more on those things than on the presidential inquiry or the impeachment inquiry. And those are thoughts that I would like to share.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And I want us all to show her respect, whether you agree with her or not. I can tell you this, I've spent 99.9% of the time as a member of Congress focused on 4 or 5 things. That's all. 1, supporting our family farmers. 2, the cost of health care and the price of prescription drugs. Infrastructure and transportation investments in this congressional district. Fully funding special education in our nation. And the need to rethink technical education in this country and make sure that every young person knows that this is a great option in our country. So no matter what cable news is talking about, no matter what we're seeing on TV every night, I promise and I commit to every single one of you that these are the 5 issues that are going to remain my highest priority. Thank you. Thank you for being here and for sharing your thoughts.
Hi, Angie. Jeff from Lakeville. My question is, it seems like we're continuing to live in a two different Americas. There's the ones that watch one type of news, and then there's the ones that watch a completely separate type of news. And depending on which side of the aisle you're on, that's you think your side is correct. And the problem is, the truth isn't necessarily somewhere in the middle. What can we do to ensure that people are getting accurate information? Because there are networks out there that disseminate false information. Facebook just changed their policy, so now you can run political ads with completely fake information. What can we do as a country to ensure that people are informed? Because uninformed people are not, they can't make good decisions.
Well, you are, thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. It is really challenging these days, which is one reason I tease and say I'm on a cable news diet right now. I get on the plane when I go back to Washington each week with 17 local newspapers. The 17 local newspapers of the 2nd Congressional District, because those items that are being covered in those newspapers, those are the highest priorities of this congressional district. It's local news. And I would just say, to each of you, we have to be able to find public access television. You're going to have to work harder to get to the truth yourself. One of the things that I've started doing is on our campaign, on our official website, I have a newsletter. And often documents that are made public to me and also the public, we've started putting them on there. And I've started inviting my constituents to go read these items for yourself. Make your own judgment. Be objective. And I'm going to warn you all, every once in a while, you need to just get off Twitter for a little bit, turn off cable news, or at a minimum, flip it back and forth between Fox News and MSNBC so that you can see each side of an issue. And that's why public access television to me is so important. It's why we have Eagan TV with us here tonight. I spent 4 years, the early part of my career, as a journalist. And there is an incredible role in journalism, objective journalism, getting a picture of both sides. And we have to make sure that we support a free and fair free speech and free press, and stand with and up for and speak out for the journalists who are putting their lives at risk in places around the world to bring us objective information. Thank you.
I'm Nancy from Beaver Grove Heights, and I guess my concern is about some of the federal organizations that are meant to protect consumers, like the FDA and the CDC, and just kind of the apparent failures in recent years that seem to keep occurring, like the medical mesh that's been a nightmare for many, Escher, Vioxx, opioids, and there's so many conflicts of interest in these organizations and whistleblowers within them, the whole CDC spider talking about those things. What's being done to address that? Because not only did they allow people like Dr. Paul Offit sat on the vaccine advisory committee with his own invention that he owned the patent to and told the entire United States and his fellow committee members to vote for that to be injected into every child while he owned the patent and he voted for it. And yet we're supposed to trust these organizations with our children. And that's contributing to the vaccine hesitancy and the problems around disease. So this past spring, rather than addressing those transparency and objectivity issues, there's a House File 2527 was with proposing coercive measures to take away federal grants for education from states who do still maintain religious and philosophical exemptions to vaccines. Do you support measures like that coerce?
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being here too. Thank you. I'm not familiar with the House resolution, the House file that you referred to, so I'd like an opportunity, if you could, to have you share that with my team. But I am very familiar with conflicts of interest, both in the healthcare field and in the government, and it is my belief that we have to rid both of conflicts of interest. That's why I authored a bill called the Humble Act that would apply to every member of Congress to make sure that once you serve our nation, you cannot serve as a lobbyist or shill for a company down the road. This is stunning in its truth, that you can be a member of Congress today and you can sit on one of the company boards that you just referenced. It is not against the law for a member of Congress to sit on a for-profit corporate board. I sat in enough boardrooms when I worked in business to know that there is absolutely no reason and absolutely unethical, illegal for me to be sitting in the room as a member of Congress. So, you know, I'll look at the House file, but we need to make sure that the law is clear and that we cut every conflict of interest that we can, both in our healthcare communities, frankly, and in our political institutions. Thank you. I'm going to need to read the bill before I can tell you if I support it or not. I am one of those legislators who insists on reading the damn bill. So I apologize for not being able to answer your question tonight, but I'll never apologize for that. Awesome. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. And I especially want to thank folks who came out tonight for the first time to a town hall. This is just an incredible turnout. And I want to tell you that I really believe in good public policy. I really, really believe that if we start listening to each other more, if we do the hard work in Congress of getting to know each other, if we do the hard work in our communities of getting to know each other, that we can begin to tackle the political divide that exists today. When I tell you that 80% of the bills that I co-sponsor, well, the number's actually 79, is bipartisan, that is because we really can find that level of common ground if we work hard and try to do it. So thank you for being here tonight. Mayor McGuire, thank you for having such a great community center and community. And I really look forward to our next town hall. Thank you very much.